Okay, here is the written story in American English with added punctuation, pauses, correct spelling, US units of measurement, dramatic emotions, and details. Imagine being banned from using your own tractor. Then watching the very people who slapped that ridiculous ban on you come crawling back for help when disaster strikes. That's precisely what happened to me when my homeowners association's HOA ludicrous rule came back to bite them hard, and let me tell you, it was glorious. I'd lived in my neighborhood for over a decade. It was supposed to be the perfect blend of rural charm and suburban convenience, a place where folks could enjoy spacious lots, a tight-knit community, and just a little taste of country living. That's why I had my tractor. It wasn't just for show. It was an essential tool. In the winter, I used it to clear my driveway and help my neighbors do the same. In the summer, it kept my property looking sharp. And let's be real, who doesn't love having a powerful machine that makes life a little easier? But as with most suburban apparatuses, there was a catch: the HOA. This organization was supposedly in place to keep the community looking nice, but over the years, it had morphed into something else entirely: a power-hungry group run by people who clearly had way too much time on their hands and nothing better to do than micromanage their neighbors. And at the very top of this pyramid of petty power was Deborah. Yes, that was her real name, and yes, she lived up to every single expectation you might have. Deborah had been HOA president for 3 long years, and in that time, she'd made it her personal mission to enforce the most pointless rules imaginable, rules that only seemed to benefit her warped idea of a perfect neighborhood. You couldn't have a shed unless it matched your house's trim color. You couldn't leave your trash cans out for more than 2 hours after pickup. And don't even get me started on the Christmas decorations ban. But the one rule that truly made my blood boil, the one that sent steam practically shooting out of my ears, was the no heavy machinery rule. It started with a letter. Dear homeowner, it read, dripping with self-importance, per HOA guidelines, all heavy machinery, including tractors, is prohibited from being stored on residential property. I honestly thought it was a joke. My tractor had been parked in my driveway for years without a single issue. I used it responsibly. I wasn't tearing up the roads or running it at all hours of the night. And yet, somehow, Deborah and her cronies decided that my completely legal, incredibly useful, and utterly non-intrusive tractor was a problem. I attended the next HOA meeting, fully expecting to resolve this ridiculous situation with a little bit of common sense. Oh, that was my first colossal mistake. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a place that was supposed to be for community events but was mostly used for HOA power trips. I sat in the back, arms crossed, jaw tight, waiting impatiently for my turn. Deborah, dressed in her usual power suit and sporting a fake smile that could curdle milk, called the meeting to order. Gary, the HOA vice president and Deborah's loyal lapdog, sat beside her, nodding along like he didn't have a single original thought in his head. When my turn finally came, I kept it simple. I explained that my tractor wasn't an eyesore, it wasn't a hazard, and more importantly, it was absolutely necessary for snow removal. Without it, my driveway and several of my neighbors would become completely inaccessible during winter storms. Deborah smiled in that condescending way that made my blood pressure skyrocket. I understand your concerns, she said, which was HOA speak for, I don't care in the slightest, but the board has decided that heavy machinery, including tractors, does not align with the aesthetic of our community. We have a snowplow service for the roads, so private equipment is unnecessary. Unnecessary? Tell that to the elderly couple down the street who relied on me to clear their driveway every single year. Tell that to the single mom who wouldn't be able to get her car out after a major snowfall. But Deborah didn't care about practicality. She cared about rules, her rules. I pointed out, my voice rising with frustration, that my tractor was already here and had been for years without any issue. But Gary, ever the echo, chimed in, the rule is the rule. If we make exceptions, then everyone will want to bend the guidelines. And that was it. The HOA voted. My tractor was banned. I had 30 days to remove it, or I'd be fined $100 per week. If I refused to comply, they could escalate the fines and eventually slap a lien on my property. I had no choice. I fought it as much as I could, but in the end, I had to give in. A friend of mine had a barn outside of town where I could store it. With a heavy heart, I drove my tractor away, the rumble of its engine a mournful goodbye, knowing full well that this was going to cause way more problems than it solved. Winter came fast that year, but at first, it was mild, a few flurries here and there, nothing major. The HOA was smug, acting like they'd made the right decision. Then, in early January, the weather reports started to change. Meteorologists warned that a historic blizzard was on the way. We weren't talking about a few measly inches. We were talking about multiple feet of snow, high winds, and dangerously low temperatures. A storm like this wasn't just inconvenient. It was paralyzing. Despite the dire warnings, the HOA remained stubbornly confident that their tiny, underfunded plow service would be enough. After all, they had paid good money for it. They even sent out a patronizing email reminding residents that personal snow-clearing equipment was unnecessary and that we should all just be patient. But the storm didn't care about HOA policies. When it hit hard. Within hours, the roads disappeared under feet of snow. Power lines snapped under the weight of ice. The entire town was thrown into chaos. By the next morning, everything was frozen solid. People were trapped inside their homes, cars were buried under mountainous drifts, and that plow service the HOA was so proud of, nowhere to be found. Panic started to set in. People realized they had no way to get out. Neighbors started calling each other, desperately trying to figure out a solution. Some tried shoveling their driveways, but the snow was far too deep. The HOA's brilliant plan of waiting it out quickly collapsed in a heap of frozen failure. Then, the calls started coming in. I sat in my living room, sipping coffee, warm and comfortable thanks to my trusty generator, when I heard the first knock. I opened the door to see Gary standing there, bundled up like a kid going on his first snow day. His face was tight with barely contained embarrassment. "Hey," he said, clearing his throat awkwardly, "we could use some help." I raised an eyebrow, a smirk already playing on my lips. "Help with what, Gary?" Gary shuffled his feet, his pride visibly crumbling. "The roads. The driveways. Deborah's house is completely snowed in. The plows aren't coming. He sighed, finally spitting it out, "we need your tractor." I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment like a fine wine. "You mean the tractor? The one the HOA banned?" Gary winced. "Yeah, that one." I leaned against the doorframe, letting him stew in his own words. I wasn't going to let them off the hook that easily, not after what they'd done. "Oh, I'd love to help," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm thick enough to spread on toast, "but you see, my tractor isn't stored here anymore. HOA rules and all. But hey, good luck with that storm." And with that, I shut the door right in his face. This was going to be fun. Gary's face had been absolutely priceless when I shut the door on him. He stood there for a moment, probably expecting me to crack and offer to help. When I didn't, he trudged back through knee-deep snow, slipping twice on his way down my driveway. I watched him struggle, sipping my coffee with a wide smirk. The HOA had made their bed. Now they could lie in it under 3 feet of snow. I knew it wouldn't be the last time I heard from them. The storm had only just begun. By noon, the entire neighborhood was completely buried. The snow wasn't just falling. It was piling up at an alarming rate. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling my windows and creating monstrous snowdrifts that swallowed everything in sight: cars, mailboxes, even some of the shorter fences vanished beneath the white onslaught. The town's power grid, which had always been about as reliable as a politician's promise, finally gave up. One by one, houses went dark. At first, I didn't mind. My generator kicked in automatically, humming to life and keeping everything running smoothly. I had food, heat, and most importantly, the immense satisfaction of knowing that I had warned these people. The first sign of real trouble came when I checked my phone. The neighborhood group chat was on fire. Gary, HOA? Does anyone have updates on when the plows will be here? Roads are still completely covered. Debbie, HOA enforcer, my driveway is blocked. I can't even get my front door open. Who do we call? Random neighbor number 1, I tried to shovel, but it's too deep. Can't open my garage door either. Random neighbor number 2, anyone else lose power? Our heater isn't working. It's freezing in here. Then, the best message of all, Deborah, HOA president, the snowplow company just emailed me. They're overwhelmed and won't be able to reach our neighborhood for at least 3 days. Please remain calm. I nearly dropped my phone from laughing so hard. 3 days. Oh, this was going to be good. I peeked outside again. The street looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie, just endless walls of snow, no visible pavement, no tire tracks. Cars were stuck where they'd been left, their owners either too late or too arrogant to move them before the storm hit full force. Now, I should clarify, I don't enjoy seeing my neighbors suffer. Most of them are good people, just victims of Deborah's delusions of power. But the HOA board? They deserved every single bit of this frozen misery. As night fell, things got exponentially worse. The temperature plummeted into the single digits, and without power, a lot of homes had no way to stay warm. People started to panic. The same folks who had smugly supported the tractor ban were now realizing just how badly they had screwed themselves. That's when the desperate knocks on my door started. The first was my next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Frank. He had never been a fan of the HOA's nonsense, but he had kept his head down to avoid trouble. Now, his heater was out, and his wife was wrapped in 3 blankets, shivering uncontrollably. "Do you still have power?" he asked, his breath visible in the freezing air. I nodded. "Generator. Do you mind if we sit inside for a while? Just to warm up?" Now, this was different. Frank wasn't part of the problem. I immediately let them in, offering them hot coffee and a seat by the crackling fireplace. As they thawed out, I heard another knock, then another. Within an hour, I had 4 families camped out in my living room. Meanwhile, the HOA board members, who lived in their massive, over-decorated homes, were too prideful to ask for help. Deborah was still sending out delusional emails insisting that everything was under control, even as people in the chat begged for solutions. Then came the breaking point. Sometime after midnight, I was sitting in my kitchen, scrolling through the increasingly frantic messages, when my phone rang. I raised an eyebrow. No one ever actually called anymore. When I saw the name on the screen, I nearly choked on my coffee. Deborah. Oh, this was too good. I let it ring a few times before answering. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, then a forced cough. "We need to talk." I grinned, picturing her miserable face. "About what, Deborah?" "The roads," she said through gritted teeth, "and your equipment." "Oh," I said, dragging it out for maximum effect, "you mean my tractor? The one the HOA said was unnecessary?" More silence. Then she exhaled sharply, a sound of pure frustration. "Look, I don't have time for this. The plows aren't coming. We need to clear the road so that emergency services can get through. People are trapped." Sounds rough. Another pause. "Are you going to help or not?" I leaned back in my chair, enjoying every single second of this delicious moment. "Well, see, Deborah, I would love to help, but you made it crystal clear that my tractor was a blatant violation of HOA policy. I wouldn't want to break the rules, now would I?" Her voice rose an octave, laced with desperation. "Are you seriously going to let people suffer just to prove a point?" "Oh no," I said, my voice dripping with faux concern, "I definitely want to help. I just think we need to settle a few things first." Deborah hesitated, the silence thick with her internal struggle. What things? I smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile this time. First, I want the tractor ban lifted immediately. In writing. There was a long, heavy silence. I could practically hear her chewing on her own considerable pride. Fine, she finally spat out. And, I continued, not letting up the pressure, I want a public apology at the next HOA meeting. You and the entire board will admit, for everyone to hear, that you were wrong. Are you kidding me? I stayed quiet, letting her stew. She grumbled something unintelligible under her breath, then exhaled with the sound of a punctured tire. Fine. I wasn't done yet. And I want all the fines I paid refunded. Every single dollar. Her voice was tight with barely contained rage. Fine. Just get over here and clear the damn roads. I stood up, stretching languidly. See, Deborah? That wasn't so hard, was it? Before she could explode, I hung up. The next morning, I trudged through the waist-high snow to get my tractor back from my friend's barn. When I finally rolled up to the neighborhood, people actually cheered. The same people who had ignored me before, the ones who had blindly voted with the HOA, were now treating me like a conquering hero. I took my sweet time, making a big show of revving the engine, slowly plowing through the towering snowbanks, clearing driveways one by one. Deborah's house? Oh, I saved that for last. As I worked my way through the neighborhood, I made sure to wave at her every single time I passed her window. She looked like she wanted to murder me with her bare hands, but hey, rules are rules, and I was just following their rules, after all. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the neighborhood was a frozen wasteland. The storm had dumped nearly 3 feet of snow overnight, turning driveways into impassable trenches and cars into snow-covered tombs. A thick layer of ice coated absolutely everything, and the wind had sculpted drifts as tall as fences. The temperature had plummeted to nearly 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and without power, most houses had become unlivable iceboxes. Inside my house, everything was fine. My generator hummed quietly, keeping the lights on and the heat running. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, feeling well rested after a good night's sleep. But outside, it was absolute chaos. People were beginning to realize just how utterly unprepared they were. The HOA's so-called solution of waiting for the plows had completely backfired. There were no plows coming, not today, not tomorrow, not anytime soon. The town was in a state of emergency, and our little neighborhood wasn't a priority. We were at the bottom of the list, left to fend for ourselves. I scrolled through the neighborhood group chat, which had now transformed into a desperate plea board. Does anyone have a working fireplace? We're freezing in here. My wife is sick, and we need to get to a hospital. Someone help. I can't get my door open. Snow is blocking the entire front of my house. Does anyone have extra blankets? Our house is an ice cube. Every few minutes, new messages popped up, each more panicked than the last. Then came the best one of all, Deborah, HOA President. If anyone has a way to clear the roads, please step up. The HOA is looking for volunteers. Oh, now they wanted help. I stared at the message for a second, debating just how petty I wanted to be. I could go out right now and start clearing everything, be the bigger person, and save the day. Or, I could let them stew for a little longer, let the full weight of their monumental mistake sink in. After all, these were the same people who had so smugly banned my tractor, the same ones who had handed out fines like Halloween candy. I set my phone down and poured myself another steaming cup of coffee. An hour later, another knock came at my door. I wasn't surprised to see Gary standing there again, his face red from the biting cold. His usual smug demeanor was completely gone, replaced by a look of genuine desperation. "Listen," he said, shivering uncontrollably, "this is getting serious. Some people don't have heat, and others are running out of food. We need the roads cleared. We need you." I leaned against the doorframe, feigning thoughtfulness. "Oh, I thought personal snow clearing equipment was strictly against HOA policy, Gary." Gary clenched his jaw, his teeth chattering. Deborah said she'll reverse the rule. Just help us, man. I pretended to think about it, tapping my chin. I'm going to need that in writing, Gary. Gary blinked at me, incredulous. You're joking, right? I raised an eyebrow. Do I look like I'm joking, Gary? Without another word, he turned and trudged back through the snow, slipping on a patch of ice as he went. A few minutes later, my phone dinged with a new email from the HOA board. It was short and to the point, effective immediately. The restriction on personal heavy machinery for snow removal is lifted. I chuckled. That was the fastest policy reversal in HOA history. Now that I had what I wanted, it was finally time to get to work. I grabbed my winter gear, layered up like an Arctic explorer, and hopped in my truck, heading out to retrieve my trusty tractor from my friend's barn. The drive was slow and treacherous, the roads barely passable, but once I finally made it there and started up the engine, the familiar rumble vibrating through me, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. When I returned to the neighborhood, people were already outside, eagerly watching as I rolled in. Some waved enthusiastically, others actually cheered. It was hilarious. These were the same people who had supported the HOA's dumb rule just weeks ago. Now, they were acting like I was some kind of snow-clearing superhero. I made a big show of it, revving the engine dramatically before pushing the first massive wall of snow out of the way. The tractor roared to life, its powerful blades cutting through the drifts like butter. Slowly but surely, I started clearing the roads, carving paths between houses, uncovering driveways, and freeing trapped cars. But there was one house I deliberately didn't clear, Deborah's. I passed by it several times, always slowing down just enough for her to see me. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight, furious line. Her driveway was completely buried, and she wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Some of the other neighbors noticed what I was doing. One even came up to me and whispered, a mischievous grin on his face, "Dude, you're not going to clear hers, are you?" I smirked. Not yet. I kept working, plowing through street after street. By mid-afternoon, most of the neighborhood was accessible again. People started emerging from their houses, helping each other dig out walkways and paths. The mood had shifted. It was less of a crisis now and more of a community effort. Then, finally, I made my way toward Deborah's house. I took my time, slowly clearing a path to her driveway, deliberately making her wait. When I finally reached the front of her property, she stepped outside, bundled in layers, her face a tight mask of forced politeness. "Thank you for helping," she said stiffly, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned off the engine and climbed down from the tractor. "Oh, I'm just following HOA policy now, Deborah." Her eye twitched almost imperceptibly. "We really do appreciate it," she said, the words sounding like they were being pulled from her teeth. I folded my arms, leaning against the side of my tractor. "I'll clear your driveway, Deborah, but first, I want a public apology." Deborah's face flushed a deep crimson. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, loud enough for the other neighbors who were now watching with keen interest to hear. "You forced me to remove my tractor, fined me for having it, and now you want my help? I'll do it, but you need to admit, right here, right now, that you were wrong." A few people gasped, while others smirked, clearly enjoying the unfolding drama. Deborah's face twisted like she had swallowed a lemon. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she muttered, her voice barely audible, "Fine. You were right. The rule was misguided." I cupped a hand to my ear, feigning deafness. "Sorry, what was that?" "I didn't quite hear you, Deborah." She glared at me, her jaw clenched so tight I thought it might shatter. "I said you were right. The HOA was wrong. The tractor ban was a mistake." I let the moment hang in the air, the silence punctuated only by the gentle crunch of snow. Then, I nodded slowly. "See, Deborah? That wasn't so hard, was it?" With that, I climbed back onto my tractor and cleared her driveway in a matter of minutes. As I finished up, I noticed something beautiful. Neighbors were shaking their heads, talking amongst themselves, a newfound sense of camaraderie in the air. The tides were turning. The HOA had lost its iron grip. This was just the beginning. The moment Deborah choked out that apology, I knew I had won. She had spent years lording over this neighborhood, enforcing pointless rules and making life miserable for anyone who dared question her authority. But now, she was at my mercy, and nothing, not her title, not the HOA's so-called power, not even her massive ego could save her from the fact that she desperately needed me. But I wasn't done. Clearing her driveway was just the start. The real revenge? That was going to be delicious. After finishing her driveway, I parked the tractor right in the middle of the street, directly in front of her house. I leaned back in my seat and stretched, making a big show of taking my time. A few neighbors had gathered around, watching the scene unfold like it was the best entertainment they'd had in years. Deborah stood on her porch, arms crossed, still scowling. "Are you just going to sit there?" she demanded, her voice tight with fury. I smirked. Yep. Her nostrils flared. "Why?" I pulled out my phone and checked the time, a picture of innocent nonchalance. "Oh, I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what?" she practically shrieked. I grinned, my eyes twinkling with mischievous delight. "For you to send an email to the entire neighborhood, officially reversing the tractor ban publicly." Her face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. "I said the rule was lifted." She sputtered. "Yeah, but that was just to me," I said, my voice calm and reasonable. "I want everyone to see it. I want it in writing, for all to witness." She looked like she wanted to argue, to scream, to throw a full-blown tantrum, but she was trapped. If she refused, I could just leave, and she'd be snowed in again. If she sent the email, she'd be admitting to everyone that she had been wrong, publicly and unequivocally. I could see the internal battle raging within her, her pride warring with her desperate need for the snow to be cleared. But in the end, the choice wasn't really hers. With a frustrated stomp of her foot, she disappeared inside her house. A few agonizing minutes later, my phone dinged with a new email notification. From Deborah HOA President. Subject: Important announcement regarding snow removal policy. Dear neighbors, due to unforeseen circumstances, the HOA is officially rescinding the restriction on personal heavy machinery for snow removal. We recognize the importance of community support during extreme weather conditions and appreciate everyone's cooperation. Sincerely, the HOA board. I let out a short, triumphant laugh. Unforeseen circumstances. That was a fancy way of saying, we screwed up royally and need to cover our backsides. I turned to the neighbors who were still watching the spectacle unfold. "Well folks," I announced with a grin, "looks like we're officially allowed to own tractors again." A few people clapped, and one particularly enthusiastic neighbor actually cheered. Deborah stepped back onto her porch, glaring daggers at me. "Happy now?" she snapped. I pretended to think about it, tapping my chin thoughtfully. "Almost." Her shoulders slumped even further. "What now?" she asked, her voice weary. "I want my fines refunded," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "every single dollar." There was a collective ooh from the neighbors. They were absolutely loving this. Deborah, however, looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. That's not up to me. That's the board." I held up my phone, the email from her still displayed. "You're the HOA president, Deborah. And as president, you can authorize refunds." She opened her mouth, then closed it, looking around as if searching for backup. But Gary and Debbie, her usual enforcers, weren't anywhere to be seen. They had abandoned ship the moment things got truly bad. Finally, with a defeated sigh, she said, "Fine." I refreshed my email. A few minutes later, another message arrived. From Gary HOA Treasurer. Subject: Fine rescission. Dear Mark, your previous fines have been rescinded. A refund will be processed in the next billing cycle. Sincerely, Gary, HOA Treasurer. I grinned. See, Deborah? That wasn't so hard, was it? Deborah looked like she wanted to launch herself at me, but she was too frozen, both literally and figuratively. I gave her a mock salute, revved the tractor one last time, and cleared the last of the snow from her walkway. As I was finishing up, a few neighbors approached me. "You know," said one, a guy named Bill who had mostly stayed out of the HOA drama, "we should probably talk about getting her out of office." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh? Has she been running this place like her personal kingdom for years?" Another neighbor chimed in, nodding vehemently. "I think it's definitely time for a change." It was music to my ears. Over the next few days, as I continued helping dig people out, I noticed a significant shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. People who had been too afraid to speak up before were suddenly voicing their frustrations. They were done with Deborah's reign of terror. A petition started circulating, its goal to remove her as HOA president, and the best part? I didn't even have to start it. The petition spread like wildfire. One by one, signatures poured in. It wasn't just about the tractor ban anymore. It was about years of unnecessary fines, ridiculous rules, and over-the-top enforcement. People were genuinely angry. Deborah tried to do damage control. She sent out pathetic emails insisting that she had always acted in the best interest of the community. She even went door to door, trying to sway people with her usual manipulative tactics. It didn't work. By the end of the week, the petition had more than enough signatures to trigger a recall vote at an emergency HOA meeting. The meeting was standing room only. Deborah sat at the front, arms crossed, trying to maintain what little power she had left. When it came time for the vote, the results were overwhelming. 81% voted to remove her. She was done. When the decision was announced, she stood up, shaking her head in utter disbelief. "This is a mistake," she muttered, her voice trembling with indignation. "No, Deborah," someone called out from the back, "the mistake was thinking we'd put up with you forever." People actually applauded as she stormed out of the clubhouse, a look of pure fury etched on her face. The new HOA board was elected that same night, and the very first thing they did was roll back half of the ridiculous rules Deborah had put in place. The absolute best part? The neighborhood decided we desperately needed an emergency response plan for future storms, and guess what piece of equipment they overwhelmingly voted to purchase for the HOA? A brand new, shiny tractor. When they tentatively asked if I would be willing to be the one to operate it, I just smiled, a wide, genuine smile, and said, "Oh, I'd love to. As long as it doesn't violate HOA policy, of course." Everyone erupted in laughter. Deborah, by the way? She put her house up for sale the very next month. She simply couldn't handle living in a neighborhood where she wasn't in complete control. I made absolutely sure to plow an extra-large, impenetrable snowbank right in front of her for sale sign before she left. You know, just for old time's sake. The moment Deborah stormed out of that HOA meeting, a palpable weight seemed to lift from the entire neighborhood. People who had been afraid to even make eye contact with her before were suddenly laughing, shaking hands, and exchanging stories about just how much of a nightmare she had truly been. It wasn't just about me and my beloved tractor anymore. Deborah's dramatic downfall was a victory for the entire community. But while the HOA drama had taken center stage, the stark reality was that the blizzard had left serious damage in its icy wake. Even with the roads partially cleared, the neighborhood was still struggling. The relentless snow had finally stopped, but the aftermath was brutal. Temperatures remained dangerously low, and many homes were still without power. Elderly residents were stuck in freezing houses, families were rationing dwindling food supplies, and a few unlucky folks had suffered burst pipes, turning their basements into frozen swimming pools. That's when I realized that simply clearing the roads wasn't enough. If we were going to truly survive this storm together, we needed more than just plowed streets. We needed a full-scale rescue operation. I pulled my tractor back into my driveway and sent a message to the neighborhood group chat, me, "Alright folks, the roads are clear, but we've still got a lot of people in trouble. If you have power, heat, or extra supplies, let's start helping our neighbors who need assistance. Reply here with what you can offer." Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with a flood of messages. "My grandmother's stuck in her house, and she's running low on medicine. I've got plenty of food but no heat. Can anyone take my family in? We lost power, and my dad's oxygen machine isn't working. We need to get him somewhere safe." I wasn't the only one stepping up. Bill, the guy who had been instrumental in starting the petition against Deborah, immediately offered his spacious home as a temporary warming shelter. A couple of other neighbors volunteered their houses as well. People with four-wheel drive vehicles started carpooling, picking up stranded residents and bringing them to warm, safe havens. It was truly beautiful to witness. For the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like a genuine community. But there were still some major problems. First, the local emergency services were completely overwhelmed. The town's main roads were still heavily clogged, and first responders couldn't reach our isolated neighborhood. That meant we had to handle things ourselves. Second, some of the elderly residents were completely cut off. Their front doors were blocked by massive snowdrifts, and even though I had cleared the roads, they still couldn't physically get out of their houses. That's when I had another idea. I sent out another message, me, "I've got the tractor. If anyone knows of someone who's trapped in their house, let me know the address. I'll start clearing doorways and driveways to get them out." My phone practically exploded with responses. I started with Frank, the elderly gentleman who had asked to warm up at my place the night before. His small house was almost entirely buried in snow. I had to use the full power of the tractor just to carve a narrow path to his front porch. When I finally cleared the last of the snow blocking his door, he stepped out, bundled up in multiple layers, shaking his head in disbelief. "Son," he said, clapping me firmly on the shoulder, a tear glistening in his eye, "if I had a daughter, I'd make her marry you." I laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh. "Appreciate that, Frank. You good to get over to Bill's house for some heat?" He nodded, a grateful smile spreading across his weathered face. "Already packed a bag." From there, I went house to house, plowing through seemingly endless snowbanks, freeing trapped families, and making paths for people to evacuate safely. One house had a pregnant woman who had been stuck inside for 2 agonizing days with no power. When I finally reached her front door, her frantic husband nearly hugged me in relief. "Dude," he exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion, "I was this close to breaking a window and climbing out." Another house had a young family with a newborn baby. They had been desperately wrapping the tiny infant in layers of blankets, but their house had dropped below freezing. I cleared their driveway and personally drove them in my truck to one of the warmed-up homes. Everywhere I went, people were offering help, sharing precious supplies, and genuinely looking out for one another. Even Gary, the former HOA lapdog, tried to get involved. He sheepishly came up to me, rubbing his gloved hands together in the frigid air. "So, what can I do to help?" I smirked, remembering his blind loyalty to Deborah. "You got a shovel, Gary?" "Yeah," he replied hesitantly. "Great," I said, gesturing towards a particularly snowed-in house. "Start digging." To my surprise, he actually did it. Maybe even he had finally realized that Deborah's power-hungry nonsense wasn't worth a neighborhood full of suffering. By the end of the day, we had rescued over a dozen families, moved everyone into homes with heat, and gotten a few of the most vulnerable folks to a nearby shelter that had emergency power. Just when I thought we were finally done, another message popped up on the group chat: "There's a family trapped in their house at the very end of the cul-de-sac. They have no phone signal. Someone just saw them waving frantically from the window." That part of the street had the worst snowdrift, a monstrous, icy barrier formed by the relentless wind. Even my tractor struggled against the sheer weight of the packed snow and ice, but I pushed through, the engine roaring in protest. When I finally reached the house, sure enough, a woman and two small children were standing at the window, waving frantically. The father was desperately trying to force the front door open, but it wouldn't budge. I jumped out of the tractor and started shoveling by hand, my muscles screaming in protest against the cold and the effort. After a few grueling minutes, the dad managed to shove the door open just enough to squeeze through, his face pale with relief. "We thought we were stuck for days," he said, his voice hoarse with fear. "I didn't know how much longer we could last." "You're not alone," I told him, my voice firm. "Let's get you out of here." I drove them to Bill's house, where a warm meal and a working heater were waiting. By the time the town finally got around to plowing our roads 2 days later, the crisis was already over. We had saved ourselves. The funny thing? Throughout this entire ordeal, Deborah hadn't lifted a single finger to help. She had spent the entire time holed up in her massive, snowbound house, only emerging once everything was already mostly back to normal. When she finally did venture outside, I was finishing up plowing the last bit of snow in front of my own house. She walked up to me, her arms crossed, a look of icy disdain on her face. "I suppose you expect me to thank you," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile. "Nope." Her lips pressed together in a thin, angry line. She looked around, finally realizing that her precious power over this neighborhood was officially gone. No one was listening to her anymore. I climbed back onto my tractor, looking down at her from the elevated seat. "But I do expect you to move out soon, Deborah." She scowled, her face contorted with rage. "You are absolutely insufferable." I revved the engine, the powerful roar echoing through the quiet street. "And you're unemployed." Then, with a final, triumphant grin, I rolled away, leaving her standing there in the melting snow. The neighborhood was stronger than ever, bound together by shared adversity and a newfound sense of community. And as for me? Well, I had a strong feeling that no one was ever going to question my right to own a tractor again. With the neighborhood roads finally cleared and the worst of the crisis over, things slowly started returning to normal. Well, almost normal. There was still the significant matter of the wreckage left in the storm's wake, collapsed fences, damaged roofs, and numerous frozen pipes. But there was one thing that had changed permanently, a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The HOA's suffocating grip on the community was irrevocably broken. For 4 long years, Deborah and her little band of rule enforcers had bullied homeowners into silent submission. But now, people had witnessed what true leadership looked like. And it wasn't the kind that came in the form of ridiculous fines and the petty control of a power-hungry tyrant. It was real neighbors helping each other, genuine compassion, and a shared sense of responsibility. And Deborah? She was sinking fast. Ever since the recall vote that so decisively kicked her out of power, she had been desperately trying to claw her way back into relevance, sending out increasingly frantic and self-pitying emails. But the truth was, no one cared what she had to say anymore. The final nail in her HOA coffin came with the overwhelming support for a petition to abolish several of the association's most egregious policies, including the ludicrous fines for things like trash can placement, the nonsensical ban on personal lawn equipment, and the utterly joyless restrictions on holiday decorations. The meeting where those oppressive rules finally got overturned? Let me tell you, it was glorious. It was held in the very same community clubhouse where Deborah had once ruled with an iron fist, her every whim treated as gospel. But this time, instead of her usual smug confidence, she sat silently in the back, arms crossed, her face a mask of bitter resentment, watching helplessly as everything she had so meticulously built on a foundation of petty control crumbled before her very eyes. I had strategically taken a front row seat, practically twirling my metaphorical mustache as I enjoyed the show. The new HOA president, Bill, who had been one of the first to wholeheartedly support the effort to remove Deborah, stood at the podium, a genuine smile on his face. "All right folks," he said, looking out over the packed room, "we have a few major items to discuss tonight. First on the agenda, removing the fines for using personal equipment to maintain our properties, including snowblowers, tractors, and lawnmowers. A thunderous cheer erupted from the crowd. Even a few of the previously silent neighbors couldn't contain their enthusiasm. Deborah, sitting in the back, looked like she was about to spontaneously combust with unadulterated rage. The motion passed unanimously, without a single dissenting vote. Next item, Bill continued, his voice filled with satisfaction, abolishing excessive fines for minor infractions, including trash can placement and driveway decorations. Another resounding round of applause filled the room. Gary, the former HOA vice president who had been suspiciously quiet ever since Deborah's dramatic downfall, tentatively raised his hand. "I think we should still have some basic guidelines to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic," he offered cautiously. Bill nodded in agreement. "That's a fair point, Gary, but they should be guidelines, not punishable offenses that bankrupt hard-working families." The new, saner policies passed with overwhelming support. And then came the final piece of poetic justice, the moment I had been waiting for all night. One of the older residents, a sweet woman named Mrs. Reynolds who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, stood up, her voice clear and steady. She adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "I have a proposal," she said, her gaze fixed firmly on the new board. Bill gestured for her to continue. "Please, Mrs. Reynolds." "I propose," she stated, her voice ringing with newfound confidence, "that Deborah officially steps down from the HOA board entirely and is permanently barred from holding any future leadership roles within this association." You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Every eye turned to Deborah, who sat frozen in her chair, her mouth agape. "You can't do that," she sputtered, her voice laced with disbelief and outrage. Mrs. Reynolds simply shrugged, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "I checked the bylaws, Deborah. With enough votes, we absolutely can." I almost choked on the sheer joy of the moment, desperately trying to stifle my laughter. The vote was called, and it wasn't even close. Deborah was out, permanently. When the results were announced, she shot up from her chair, her face a mask of utter disbelief. "This is insane!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the stunned room. "You're all turning against me. Just because of him." She pointed a trembling finger directly at me, her face turning a lovely shade of rage-induced purple. I just smiled sweetly and gave her a little mock salute. The room erupted in spontaneous applause as Deborah stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her with a resounding thud. It was finally over. Deborah had lost, and well, I had most definitely won. But the absolute best was yet to come. A few days later, I noticed something particularly interesting in the neighborhood. A real estate sign had gone up in Deborah's meticulously manicured yard. She was actually selling her house. The news spread through the neighborhood group chat like wildfire. "No way. She's actually leaving? Best thing that's happened to this neighborhood in years. Who's throwing the goodbye Deborah party?" Of course, I couldn't resist having a little bit more fun at her expense. The night before her moving trucks were scheduled to arrive, I made a special delivery. I took my trusty tractor and plowed a massive, towering snowbank right in front of her for sale sign. It was completely buried, swallowed by a mountain of frozen precipitation. I made absolutely sure it was packed in tight, a solid wall of icy defiance, so she'd have to dig it out by hand. The next morning, as she stopped outside in her signature fury, her face a thundercloud of epic proportions, she took one look at the massive, gleaming white pile of snow obstructing her sign and let out a scream that could curdle milk at 50 paces. I watched from my window, sipping my morning coffee with immense satisfaction, as she futilely hacked at the ice with a flimsy plastic snow shovel, getting absolutely nowhere. She must have spent hours out there, her rage growing with each pathetic scoop, before finally giving up in utter defeat and calling up professional snow removal service. And you know what? She deserved every single frozen second of it. Once Deborah was finally gone, her moving truck disappearing down the street like a bad dream fading into the distance, the neighborhood finally felt like home again. People were actually talking to each other, laughing together, instead of just constantly worrying about who was going to get reported for some minor, insignificant infraction. The new HOA actually listened to the community, their decisions based on common sense and the well-being of the residents, instead of making up nonsensical rules just for the sake of control. And the absolute best part of it all? The HOA, in a move that brought tears of joy to my eyes, bought a brand new, top-of-the-line community tractor specifically for emergency snow removal. And guess who they enthusiastically asked to be the one to operate it? Yep, that's right, me. Bill approached me at the very next HOA meeting, a friendly arm slung around my shoulder. "Look, Mark," he said, rubbing the back of his neck with a sheepish grin, "we all saw what you did for the neighborhood during the blizzard, and we were thinking if you're willing, we'd absolutely love for you to be in charge of snow clearing from now on." I grinned, my heart swelling with a mixture of pride and vindication. "As long as I get to park the tractor right in my own driveway, Bill." Bill laughed, a hearty, genuine laugh. "Deal. Consider it done." That winter, I cleared the neighborhood roads with a sense of purpose and satisfaction I had never felt before. Neighbors thanked me profusely, their smiles genuine and grateful, instead of finding petty reasons to complain or issue me ridiculous fines. And for the first time in years, our community truly felt like a community again, bound by mutual respect and a shared sense of belonging. A few months after Deborah finally moved out, leaving a gaping hole of peace and quiet in her wake, I got a text message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, figuring it was probably just a wrong number, but curiosity, that persistent little gremlin, got the better of me. I opened it. "Unknown, Mark, I hope you're happy. You ruined everything." My blood ran cold for a split second before I recognized the unmistakable tone of bitter, self-righteous fury. It was Deborah. Even from hundreds of miles away, she was still trying to inject her negativity into my life. I stared at the pathetic message for a moment, a wave of amusement washing over me, before bursting out laughing. This woman really had nothing better to do than sit in whatever miserable new town she had moved to and stew about losing her precious HOA throne. It was almost comical. I didn't even bother responding with words. Instead, I simply snapped a quick picture of the brand new, gleaming community tractor parked proudly in my driveway, the sun glinting off its pristine paint. I sent her the photo, blocked her number without a second thought, and went right back to enjoying my perfectly peaceful, Deborah-free life. No more fines, no more stupid rules, no more HOA tyrant. Just peace, quiet, and a damn good tractor sitting exactly where it belonged. Winter finally melted away, giving way to the vibrant hues of spring, and with it, so did the last lingering remnants of Deborah's oppressive reign. By the time the first buds appeared on the trees, the neighborhood was a completely different place. It felt more alive, more connected, than it had been in years. Gone were the petty fines, the power-hungry enforcers, and the constant, underlying fear of inadvertently violating some arbitrary HOA rule. In its place was something infinitely better, a real community where people actually helped each other, celebrated together, and supported one another instead of reporting each other over trivial nonsense. And let me tell you, living there had never been better. It was a neighborhood reborn. One of the very first things the new HOA did after Deborah's unceremonious departure was to establish a comprehensive community emergency response plan. No more blindly relying on overwhelmed outside services that might never arrive. No more passively waiting around for the town to clear our streets days after a major storm. We had our own proactive system now, designed by the people, for the people. Bill, our fantastic new HOA president, called me up one sunny afternoon, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Hey, Mark," he said, "we've been talking, and we want to set up a formal winter response team for the neighborhood." I was immediately intrigued. "Go on, Bill." "Well," he continued, "we were thinking we could train a dedicated group of volunteers to handle snow removal, power outages, and emergency supply distribution. And we were hoping you'd be our lead guy for equipment, that is, if you're interested." I barely even had to think about it. Are you telling me I get to officially plow the neighborhood every winter, and no one's going to find me for it? Bill chuckled. Not only that, Mark, he said with a wink, but the HOA will actually pay you a fair stipend for your time and expertise this time. I grinned, a wide, genuine smile stretching across my face. Now that, Bill, is an HOA policy I can wholeheartedly get behind. And so, that's how I officially became the neighborhood's first ever emergency snow removal operator. But this time, it wasn't just me and my trusty old tractor. The new HOA enthusiastically approved the purchase of a second, even more powerful tractor, which was stored in a newly constructed community garage. We even had a dedicated volunteer crew of neighbors, all trained and ready to help clear the roads whenever disaster struck. It was everything Deborah had so vehemently argued was unnecessary, and yet, here we were, a united community making absolutely sure that no one would ever again be left stranded and helpless in a winter storm. The irony was so thick you could practically spread it on toast. But you know what really put the cherry on top of this whole glorious saga? One beautiful afternoon a few months later, I was out mowing my lawn, enjoying the warm sunshine on my face, when I saw a moving truck pull up to Deborah's old house. A young couple, beaming with excitement, stepped out, clearly thrilled to be in their new home. I wandered over, leaning against my fence, a friendly smile on my face. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I called out. "New neighbors?" The man, a friendly-looking fellow with a warm smile, nodded. "Yeah, we just bought the place. Moving in today." The woman, her eyes sparkling as she took in the surrounding scenery, sighed contentedly. "It's so nice here," she said, her voice full of genuine appreciation. "Everyone seems so friendly." I laughed, a quiet, knowing chuckle. "Oh, you have absolutely no idea." Then, right as I was about to properly introduce myself, I noticed something truly glorious. The couple walked over to the back of the moving truck, and from the depths of the trailer, the movers carefully pulled out a brand new, gleaming, bright green John Deere tractor. I nearly fell over laughing, the sheer perfection of the moment almost too much to bear. The guy noticed my rather extreme reaction and grinned. "Yeah," he said, completely oblivious to the delicious irony of the situation, "we heard about the big snowstorm last winter and figured it was a good idea to buy this baby just in case." I wiped a stray tear of pure joy from my eye. "Oh, man," I choked out, still chuckling, "if you only knew how absolutely perfect that is." They raised an eyebrow, clearly confused by my overly enthusiastic reaction. I just shook my head, a wide smile plastered across my face. "Don't worry," I said, "you'll find out soon enough. Welcome to the neighborhood." Deborah's final, unintentional farewell gift. Not long after the new neighbors settled in, I received another text message from a random, unfamiliar number. I almost deleted it without opening it, but that persistent little gremlin of curiosity struck again. I tapped on the message. "Unknown, Mark, I see they finally let you take over the HOA. I hope you're happy. You turned the neighborhood into a complete joke." I stared at the message for a long moment before bursting out into another fit of laughter. This woman truly had nothing better to do than sit in whatever miserable new town she had relocated to and stew about losing her precious, self-proclaimed HOA throne. I didn't even bother responding with words this time. Instead, I simply sent her another picture of the brand new community tractor, parked proudly in its designated spot in the new HOA garage, its gleaming green paint a stark contrast to the pristine blue sky. I blocked her number again, just to be thorough, and went right back to enjoying my peaceful, tractor-filled life. A new, saner era had officially begun. Months passed, filled with community events, friendly gatherings, and a distinct lack of petty squabbles. Before I knew it, the familiar chill of late autumn was in the air, and winter was once again creeping back in. But this time, there was no underlying sense of panic, no heated arguments about snow removal policies, no ridiculous HOA meetings filled with self-important pronouncements. Nope. This time, we were genuinely ready. The first significant snowfall of the season arrived just before Thanksgiving, a beautiful blanket of white that covered the landscape. It wasn't nearly as severe as the previous year's blizzard, but it was certainly enough to cause some headaches. The difference this time was astonishing. Within an hour of the first flakes really sticking, my personal tractor was out of the garage, its engine roaring to life. It was quickly joined by our brand new community plow, operated by one of our dedicated volunteers. Neighbors were already outside, bundled up in their winter gear, laughing and joking as they cleared sidewalks and helped each other dig out driveways. Instead of a neighborhood full of people waiting helplessly for some external force to rescue them, we were taking care of our own, a true testament to the strength and resilience of our newfound community spirit. At one point, Bill walked up beside me as we cleared a particularly stubborn drift, a wide smile on his face. "Crazy how much things have changed in just 1 year, huh, Mark?" I smirked, pushing a rogue strand of hair out of my eyes. "Crazy how easy it was once we got rid of all the dead weight, Bill." He laughed, a hearty, genuine laugh that echoed through the crisp winter air. "Amen to that, my friend. Amen to that." And as I drove my tractor through the snow-covered streets, clearing paths that no one could ever again find a reason to find me for, I realized something profound. For the first time in years, this neighborhood truly felt like home. And Deborah? She was just a distant, unpleasant memory, buried under the same beautiful snow she once so foolishly swore we didn't need a tractor for. So, what do you think? Do you have an HOA horror story of your own? Have you ever witnessed karma hitting someone this hard? Let me know all about it in the comments below. And if you loved watching an HOA go down in glorious flames, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more satisfying stories, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single one of my future uploads. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Valuable lesson. The most valuable lesson here is the importance of community and common sense over rigid, power-driven bureaucracy. When neighbors work together and prioritize practical needs over petty rules, they can overcome even the most challenging situations. It also highlights the satisfaction of standing up for what's right, even when facing seemingly insurmountable opposition.